Thanks, Josh. I'm grateful to you for ushering us in today. Very grateful to Miriam for inspiring today's teaching. And I'm glad to be able to offer a kernel of what Miriam was going to offer, but through my own experience. I'm also grateful to Adi for holding us today when it comes to our tech needs. And it's such a blessing to be with all of you near and far. We may be distant on the physical plane, but on the spiritual plane, we're all connected. And we're actually very, very, very close to one another, closer than we may imagine. And so it's good to actually see you and feel your presence. And this week, we are really hitting our stride and coming in for a landing during the final week of counting this 49-day count, Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, the illumination of these different qualities that we've been exploring over the last number of weeks. And we'll wrap up this week and come into Shavuot, the holiday when, according to our tradition, we received divine wisdom. And during this whole 7-week process, we're working on really refining ourselves ethically and spiritually so that we can then be ready to receive an influx of that wisdom from the divine source. And this week we're working on a quality called malchut, which literally means kingship or nobility or sovereignty. These are all fair translations. And today I really want to reflect on our own kind of innate nobility as human beings created in God's image. And then each day of each of the 7 weeks, we bring one of the other 7 qualities to bear on how we go about cultivating the primary quality. We might think about the primary quality as a kind of intention, right? We aspire this week to actually live into our innate nobility as spiritual beings. But how do we do that? So actually today, we use the technology of the quality of Gevura, which we encountered back in week 2 during that entire week, which refers to the strength that we need to be restrained, to be disciplined, to bring discernment to our experience rather than just acting from mindless habit, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be looking at both of these qualities together and using this quality of Gevura as a friend and as a technology in coming into a deeper awareness of our innate nobility and majesty as human beings created in the image of God. Those are just some words of introduction. And if I can ask Adi to please pull up the text sheet, and I believe Adi will drop the link to that as well in the chat. We can all have a quick look at that together. We're just going to be looking here at a couple of traditional sources to kind of frame our practice today. And as I mentioned, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, taught that we as human beings are extremely noble creatures, not by dint of any material achievement or attainment, or by dint of our status or our reputation, but because, as the Talmud teaches, all of Israel are children of the king, of the divine regent, the divine sovereign one. Right, which is to say that according to the Hasidic tradition, we each have what's in us, what's called a chelek Elohami ma'al, which means a little piece of divinity in us, right? That is to say, our soul, which is to say, if you think of the divine as a river of love and consciousness, there is, at least in small part, an outlet in each of us from that source that flows into each of our minds, into our hearts, into our bodies. And in fleshing out what that means about our worth, the Mishnah in Tractate Sanhedrin, when discussing the value of a human life in the context of discussing capital punishment, suggests, and you can look at the text itself by going on to sefaria.org or opening up an old school kind of hard copy of the Mishnah, that essentially human beings are infinitely worthy, right? We have infinite worth, that we're all equal in value to one another. and that even though we are infinitely worthy and equal in value, we are each unique and irreplaceable, right? So again, infinite worth, equal in value to one another, and yet each of us is simultaneously unique and irreplaceable. In other words, the image of God in you, right, finds expression in a different way than it finds expression in me, right? We all God, so to speak, in different ways, if we might turn God into a verb. We all know this to be true of ourselves as human beings. You can't objectify a human being. I mean, you can try to, but, and you can perpetuate all kinds of crimes by doing so and pretending that a human being is an object, right? But we all know that we are infinitely worthy, that we all have equal value to one another, and that we're unique and irreplaceable. We just know that because we live it, right? It's our fundamental truth. And if anyone would try to actually undercut that innate nobility and worth that you have, right, you would try to defend it. And we also feel called to respond to that worth in other people. And yet here we are right now in a time when we find ourselves living in the midst of a culture and systems and structures where that infinite worth, where that equality, where that uniqueness and irreplaceability of each human being is called into question, and where some people treat others, or some groups of people treat others as objects to be controlled, manipulated, killed, incarcerated, whatever the case may be. Of course, I'm talking about here white supremacy and the racism that's rampant in our culture. And of course, we're also in the midst now of a conflict in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, where Jews are able to somehow not see that Palestinians are created in God's image, and vice versa, right? Because why else will we pick up arms against one another if we actually knew this deep down and felt it deep down in our heart, in our being? Right? We would never do such a thing. I realize it's complicated. There are issues around self-defense and so on and so forth, right? But my question is, given that this is our primary reality as human beings, what is it that causes us to distort that reality? What is it that causes us to distort that reality? And that's where we have an opportunity to really talk about the human mind. Just a brief story of my own about bias that I held. I remember I pulled up to my in-laws here, just a little bit north of where I live in Illinois, one day, and the gardeners were there, the landscapers were there, and I got out of my car, and as I was about to go inside, I thought, do I need to lock the car? And I felt this impulse, I should lock it, right? And I noticed that the thought that crept into my mind reflexively, without me doing anything in particular, just because of the cultural conditioning and my upbringing, right, was one of fear. If I leave the car open, someone here is going to steal something, because I'm not essentially safe, right? Or these people are not safe. So where does that come from? I mean, here were human beings. They were earning a living in an honorable way, right? And they have infinite worth. They're equal to me in value. They're unique and irreplaceable, and that's just the way the mind works. Our conditioning based on our ambient culture, based on our upbringing, based on our experience, right? Based on the media, based on all kinds of things that we read and imbibe and take in, can distort our perception of reality. Right? And all kinds of biases and prejudices and presumptions just reflexively arise in the mind. And if we aren't paying attention to them, right, we can very easily overlook that the person about whom we hold these biases and presumptions and preconceptions, whether they're our spouse or our child or a particular group of people with a different skin color or a different gender identity or a different national narrative or ethnicity, right? That these people too are created in the image of God and are imbued with this innate malchut, this innate dignity and nobility. So The Baal Shem Tov offers us a practice for working with these kinds of thoughts based on Parashat Shoftim, which says, "You shall appoint judges and officers for yourself at all your gates." Judges and officers, right? Says the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, meaning you shall appoint love and restraint. The judge, says the Baal Shem Tov, is a person who tries to embody love by really being able to determine what the truth of the case is, right? And treating everyone fairly. And officers represent, the capacity to restrain people who are not necessarily acting in a good way. And we're not going to talk about defunding the police right now. Instead, the Baal Shem Tov is inviting us to talk about a self-reflective stance here, where we can essentially appoint love and restraint at all of our gates, that is, with regard to every thought that we experience. Right? A thought is a gateway. It's a gateway into the quality of consciousness that we have. It's a gateway into how spiritually developed we may be. Right? And depending upon the thoughts that arise in our mind, we can gain some insight about, who we are and what we've been kind of cultivating in ourselves, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And so when these kinds of biases arise in the mind, rather than just pushing them away or ignoring them or not noticing them, right, or distracting ourselves or getting upset with ourselves, says the Baal Shem Tov, the first thing we can do is bring some loving discernment, right? Oh yeah, look at that. There's bias. There's a story. There's presumption. And the next thing we can do is we can actually practice restraint. And this is this quality of gevura, right? Of really discerning with kind of restraint, not feeding the thought pattern, but actually noticing, is this helpful? Is this even true? Right? Do I have to feed it? Or can I just let it go? Can I just let it go? So I want to offer a very simple practice today, and then we'll practice for about 13 minutes. And it is a practice offered by the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Whenever we notice a story arising in the mind and we get so convinced that it's true, right? And that story could be something as simple as, my spouse has it out for me, or they don't love me anymore, or, my child is never going to succeed, or this pandemic is never going to go away, or, right, by dint of their skin color, those people are inferior or have, inferior intelligence or capacity or ability. Or, the Jews are in the right in this conflict and the Palestinians are in the wrong, whatever the case may be, right? We can just ask ourselves, after we bring some loving discernment to it and say, oh, look, there's a bias that's arising in my mind, right? There's a story that's arising. Then we can ask ourselves, and this is the restraint part, are you sure? Right? We don't just have to let it keep going, right? And ballooning and steamrolling forward. We can actually stop it by bringing gevura and asking, are you sure? And all of this is in the service of recognizing the innate nobility and majesty of each and every one of us and every person on this planet. So we're going to sit now for a while. And I want to invite you to bring your attention to an object that is anchoring for you in the present moment. That's usually something in the body. It could be your breath. It could be sounds. It could be the sensation of contact between your body and its support. And just bring your attention back moment by moment by moment. And as you do this, your ability to then track your thought patterns and not get caught in the story will become stronger and deeper. And if you do find that you get pulled off track by some sort of a fixation on a story, first bring some love to it, some loving discernment, name it. Oh yeah, this is a story. And then bring this quality of restraint by asking, are you sure? Are you sure? We'll regroup in a little bit, okay?
Thanks, Sam. We will have a Q&A with Sam in just a moment, but we want to give this time now to be able to recite Kaddish for those who are remembering loved ones today. And we'll also have in mind, since I didn't get a chance to say her name before, Carol Ann Blumenthal Klotz, who's Miriam's mother, who she dedicated this sit in honor of. So Adi is going to put the text up, and if you'd like to join me, please feel welcome to do so, and you're able to unmute yourself. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba Yalma Dibra Yamlich Ma'aseh B'chol Beit Yisrael Hagala An
Yehi Shmei Rabba Baruch Ome Almaya
Barach Moshiach Man Aseh Min Kol Bechatav Ya'amiran Be'alma B'Yom Mama Rabba Min Shalom. Ya Shalom. Kol Yisrael. Kol Yoshvei
Kol Yisrael.
Amen.
Kol Yoshvei Tevel. V'imru. Amen.
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 Right. So thank you again. Please feel welcome to stay with us if you need to leave now or want to. Wish you shalom and hope to see you again, same time and channel tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for the sit. Sam, one thing I was thinking of, and you should feel welcome, and I also want to invite everybody to share a question or comment, reflection in the chat. But I'll get us started off. It was interesting. One thing I was thinking about was, are you sure, right? It's like this question about security. Are you secure in that knowledge? And I was thinking of the word in Hebrew for security is bitachon, right? Or betach, of course, right? We would say in contemporary Hebrew. And of course, there are the valences now, right? Current, in terms of current events, but just, we're always talking about, safe space and being safe and feeling safe, and then also upending that a bit for ourselves and asking, well, are you really sure about that? And I wonder if that's something, how the language of safety or bitachon sort of enters into the practice here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. And I did see a comment about Jews having the right to defend themselves also, I want to respond to both of these things as one. We are inherently worthy, equally valuable and precious, but we're also fragile. These physical forms in which our souls take up residence for the short time that we're alive are very fragile vessels. And a lot of the stories that I notice myself telling myself are outgrowths of fear, right? And the mind has this kind of tendency when we feel threatened or afraid, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, to dig in its heels and kind of settle into this sense of certainty, right? That if I could just keep so-and-so at bay, or, even, criticize or do violence, in extreme cases to so-and-so or such and such a group, then I would feel safe, right? So the tendency to demonize and thereby undercut the reality I'm not saying the belief, I'm saying the reality, right? Because this is our lived experience. So that we are beings who are innately noble, created in the image of the divine, right? It is undercut when we dig our heels in that way in our search for security, right? And the thing is, it doesn't actually really work. That's the most tragic thing about all of this, right? Because then when we inflict violence on the other, whether it's mental violence by actually seeing them through our prejudice, right, which then is bound to result in some form of actual violence, whether in speech or deed, right? It actually just creates a cycle of violence where they then dig in their heels because they don't feel safe, right? They create a narrative about how we're the enemy, we're the other, we're bad, we're not deserving of any recognition of our innate holiness and worth, right? And they strike back. And then we get more scared, right? And create and reify the narrative even more strongly, and we strike back, right? And so we end up with this cycle of violence that never ends until someone says, am I sure? Is this story true? Is there another way for me to be with my fear without resorting to demonizing someone else or robbing them of their worth, right? The Buddha taught that we can never dispel hatred with hatred. We can only neutralize hatred with love. And for that love to arise, someone needs to ask the question, am I sure? Are we collectively sure? Until someone asks that question, the heart will continue to retreat behind layers of armor and mental layers of reification that create the illusion of safety, but can never actually create the reality of safety, right? So someone needs to have the bitachon, the trust, to question the story from a place of love. And that's where our practice comes in. And I'm not saying anything here about the right of the Jewish people to defend themselves, but what I will say is that all of the buildup of trauma that we've experienced as a people over the last 2,000 years, right? It makes it harder for us not to go to that place of reification, because the reflexive belief that there's imminent existential danger is really easy to trigger for us, right? Something small can happen and suddenly we feel like we're existentially threatened. And I'm not saying that what's happening in Israel and the Palestinian territories right now is that, right? But we can't discount the degree to which we so quickly fall into an us versus them mentality because we have been brutalized. And so we also need to work on healing our trauma so that we can actually grow into wisdom as a people and discern how to end conflict skillfully. Because at the end of the day, and the Dalai Lama said this, and I believe it wholeheartedly, and I'll stand by it as long as I live, there actually are no winners and losers in war. Everybody loses, right? And so war is actually obsolete. That's an enlightened perspective. And if we can heal our trauma and question all of the reified stories that we've built to protect ourselves, then we will actually begin to realize as a species that that's true. And then we'll live in a messianic era, right? But that can't happen unless we develop our consciousness. So that's a long-winded answer, Josh, and I hope it's helpful for people.
I mean, I want to just acknowledge it's getting a little hot on the chat, and this has never happened before. We've never had at IJS. We've never had a daily sit before when we didn't have a daily sit until a year ago, and in the last year there hasn't been this level of violence in Israel, and I want to acknowledge that this is new territory for all of us. And that this issue in particular, it invites us to be mindful of, for some of us, including me, why we have deep emotional familial, religious, other sorts of attachments that make this violence happens in the world all the time, worse violence than this even, and happens in our own backyards, right? And why is it that this violence, calls and implicates me in such a different way, and all of us? And so, and in this week of Shmirat HaDibur, as Sam is reminds us in a beautiful essay on the Omer this week, for all of us to just really try to be mindful about our language, and to be asking the question, to be practicing the question of, are we sure? And that I think that we can also say that we practice for the sake of compassion towards ourselves, for compassion towards the other, for all beings, Jews and everyone. And how we navigate that, this is again, every moment is what practice is for, but this moment also, in particular, these hard moments are what our practice is for. So I think that's just an invitation to all of us who are part of this community that's here in this moment, and a lot of the regulars who are here as well. God willing, we certainly pray that this violence is peacefully resolved and soon, and at the same time, we have our work to do at every moment as well. I wonder if there's anything else we want to add. I think actually, I wonder that a lot of the questions or comments seem to be in that vein, and so I just want to offer us, that over the coming days, we're likely to, this is likely to still be with us and continue, and to really practice, lean on our practice, use this as a space to come wherever we are politically, and everyone is welcome, to use this as a space to cultivate our hearts towards compassion, our minds, our mouths, our fingers, our limbs, towards compassion. And so give us all of that bracha and that intention. Sam, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I want to add one more thing. I saw Sandra's question. This is a safe space where we can disagree constructively and take responsibility for holding our own beliefs and preconceptions with curiosity rather than conviction, right? And where we can explore the relationship between how our emotions, impact our perception and the stories we tell, and possibly step into another way of being that allows us to see a little bit more clearly. And Sandra asks, what about when we leave this space? Right? So I'm actually not asking anyone here to do anything radical, really. I'm just inviting you to see if, when you have really strong opinions about something, you can hold them with some curiosity rather than so much conviction. Right? And notice if you're not feeling safe out there in the world, is it easy or difficult to do that, right? Because that's important information. It's important to know that when we don't feel safe, right, we dig in our heels and we become more, we tend to become, let me speak for myself, I tend to become more reflexively sure that I have the whole truth, right? And that my opinion is the right one, And unfortunately, we do live in a world where we still need to defend ourselves, where people of all stripes need to defend themselves against violence and brutalization and prejudice, right? What I'm suggesting is through this simple practice, right, and acknowledging our trauma and our pain, we might be able to bring the world a little bit closer to a time when no one will need to defend themselves. And that's our ultimate vision, Our practice is not just about feeling good or de-stressing or getting calm. It's about the evolution of human consciousness toward our full potential. So I just want to end on that note, right? And we're not there yet as a species, but IJS is trying to midwife along with many, many, many other people out there in the world right now who are waking up and doing this work. We're trying to midwife that era, right? To usher it in, or at least as we talk about in our tradition, right? To begin to hear the footsteps of Messiah, right? Maybe not the full embodied expression of the Messianic era, but the footsteps, right? We want to hear the harbinger, and we can do that in how we relate to our own body, heart, and mind through practice. So thanks so much for being here. I know this was a challenging window into practice. And if you're feeling a little bit triggered, I want to invite you to take a couple minutes after this to really massage your heart and give yourself some love. And hopefully you're taking away a couple of tools to begin working a little bit with whatever prejudices may arise in your mind from time to time, because we're human beings and we all experience them. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.